name's Joe, and today I thought it would be fun to share my collection of Batman action figures based on the Dark Knight Returns comic book series. The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller, Klaus Janson, and Lynn Varley came out in the mid-'80s, and this story is set in a dystopian future. Bruce Wayne has been retired for 10 years, and circumstances force him to don the cape and cowl again to become Batman. My dad bought me a copy of The Dark Knight Returns when I was a little kid. He used to buy me a lot of comic books back then. I think it was to get me more interested in reading, and I'm sure he's probably regretting that now. But I've read this story at least 20 times. It's my all-time favorite Batman story, and I'm thrilled to have a collection of action figures based on The Dark Knight Returns. So let's get on with the review. Cheers. Alright, let's kick things off with the Batman Unlimited Dark Knight Returns Batman figure by Mattel. Batman Unlimited and DC Comics Unlimited were short-lived action figure lines that came out after DC Universe Classics had kind of fizzled out. Better get used to seeing this guy because I have a lot of different variations of this figure in my collection. The only accessory that this figure came with is the black batarang in his right hand. I've read online a lot of people complaining about this head sculpt, and I've always really liked it. I really prefer the gritted teeth, grimacing head sculpt over the other head sculpt that Mattel has used on some of their more recent Dark Knight Returns Batman figures. I've heard people refer to this as Fat Batman because he's so big and bulky, and that's because he's using a Masters of the Universe Classics buck body as a base. These are the only two Masters of the Universe Classics figures that I have in my collection. There's He-Man and Skeletor, and as you can see, Batman shares a lot of parts in common with these two guys. They have the same legs from the boot cuff up to the hip. They have the same shoulders and biceps, and Batman doesn't have the nipples sculpted on like Skeletor and He-Man do, and his abdomen is a little bit wider, but I imagine that it's probably reused from another Masters of the Universe Classics figure. I typically get aggravated when toy companies reuse parts like this, but in this situation it doesn't bother me at all, because I think the Masters of the Universe buck body is a good fit for this version of Batman. I think the articulation and the way the articulation looks is generally better than your typical DC Universe Classics action figure. This Batman figure has pretty nice articulation. First of all, the neck can swivel from side to side. He can look up fairly well. That's about as far down as he can look, and also you can tilt the head back and forth. I like it when my figures can tilt their head back and forth for attitude like that. He's got a ball hinge shoulder joint that moves out about that far, goes all the way around. He has a nice bicep swivel joint, single jointed elbows, a swivel wrist. He has an ab crunch joint that can go about that far forward, but can't really go back at all. He has a really nice waist twist that's pretty well hidden by his belt. His belt and his briefs are made of a pliable, soft plastic, and it really hides the hip and thigh articulation really well. He can do the splits about that far. He can kick his leg out about that far. Kick his leg about this far back. And he has a really nice hidden thigh swivel. I like that much better than that ugly looking cut joint across the thighs on my DC Universe Classics figures. He has a single jointed knee that moves about that far. He has a really nice boot cuff swivel that's pretty well hidden, and he can point and flex his toes really well. Unfortunately, there's no ankle rocker joint in there at all, which is a real shame because the Masters of the Universe figures that I have, He-Man and Skeletor, both have really nice Toy Biz Marvel Legends style ankle rocker joints. Next up we have my custom repaint of the Batman Unlimited Dark Knight Returns Batman figure. And the first thing I did here was use a Mr. Clean magic eraser to remove part of the bat symbol on his chest. I really prefer this yellow oval. This is comic book accurate. In the first half of the book, Batman's wearing a blue and gray costume like this with the yellow oval around his bat symbol. And I think he even mentions this in the comic book, that the reason why he has the yellow oval bat symbol on his chest is because it, especially in the dark, draws gunfire away from his face and more towards his chest, where he has more body armor than any other part in his body. And that's one of the things I really like about Batman in general, like his costume. It looks garish, and it's meant to scare criminals, obviously, but every part of the Batsuit is also practical. Next, I dry brushed over the belt with a lighter shade of yellow to kind of help bring out some of that sculpted detail and to match the yellow on his bat symbol a little bit better. And then finally, I went over the black parts of his costume with either a royal blue or a true blue acrylic paint. I just always assumed that in the comic books, Batman's costume is gray and such dark blue that it looks black in low light, and so I tried to make it seem like light was reflecting off the costume from different angles. And I tried to add some detail around his ankles, his wrists, the wrinkles there in his cape, and also a little bit of muscle tone like on his forearms and his calves. I'm really happy with the way this turned out. It's one of my favorite custom figures in my collection, and I've gotten a lot of compliments on this figure. The bat cable accessory is just a cheap black cord that I bought at either Walmart or some arts and crafts store, and I wound it around in a loop like that, kind of like Wonder Woman's lasso of truth, and I super glued it in place so it would stay. And then I put it in his hand after it was dry. I wound the other end around his other hand and just put the Batarang on top of it. Next we have the DC Direct Dark Knight Returns Carrie Kelly Robin figure. And just like a lot of other DC Direct or DC Collectibles figures, she has really great sculpted and painted detail, but is really lacking as far as articulation goes. I think this figure only has 7 points of articulation, which is kind of a shame. This figure comes with a really nice slingshot accessory that has a real rubber cord on it, and this figure has been reissued a number of times in various box sets, but this is the original DC Direct single carded version. She came with a display stand that looks like a section of concrete. She definitely needs some kind of a figure stand because she has a hard time standing on her own. And finally, since this figure is so small, she also came with a really big street light accessory that glows in the dark, and I'll show you that a little bit later. Here we have the Walmart exclusive 30th Anniversary Edition DC Multiverse Dark Knight Returns Batman figure. And I like how Mattel painted the yellow oval style bat symbol on his chest, but I wish they'd have gone with a more stylized, comic book accurate bat logo like I try to do with my custom figure. It just seems lazy to me for them to paint a standard looking bat logo on his chest. I thought this figure looked a little plain, so I hand painted the shadow on the front of his face with black acrylic paints. But other than that, this is a standard figure. And I'm sure if you went to your local Walmart store, you'd be able to find at least 3 or 4 of these figures collecting dust. Up next is a customized version of the Walmart exclusive DC Multiverse Dark Knight Returns Batman figure. And you might be thinking to yourself, WTF, Joe, Batman doesn't use guns, what's the matter with you? In the first half of the Dark Knight Returns comic book series, Batman is chasing after Harvey Dent or Two-Face, and he uses a rifle like this to shoot a cable from one building to another, and he walks across it like a tightrope. That's when he gets shot in the chest, exposing the body armor underneath his suit. And it was this point in the story where he's also wearing another utility belt around his thigh like that. This custom figure isn't completely comic book accurate because I added that ankle strap. Later on in the comic, the second half, when Batman's chasing the Joker through an amusement park, he has a pistol strapped around his ankle. He uses that to shoot a grappling cable to pull down a flying gas bomb. I sculpted the exposed body armor and the shredded costume detail out of Milliput right on top of the figure's chest, and I hand-painted it with gunmetal and light gray acrylic paints. I have no idea where this hunting rifle came from originally. I found it in a box of old hand-me-down toys from my brother from when he was a kid, and I'll admit that it's a little out of scale, but it's really hard to find a hunting rifle that's bolt action with a scope on it like this. I searched online for a rifle in this scale, couldn't find one. I rummaged through all the extra rifles I have for my Marvel Legends figures and other figures that I have in my collection, and this is the closest I could find to the rifle that Batman uses in the comic book series. I painted it gunmetal gray, I painted the stock light brown and did a darker brown paint wash on it. The sling is from a DC Universe Classics Deathstroke figure, and I painted it green to match the comic book series. I sculpted the strap around Batman's thigh and around his ankle out of Milliput. I painted them yellow, and then I gave all of the belts a light brown paint wash so that they would look uniform. The ankle holster is a working holster that came from the Marvel Select Cable figure. I painted it to match the belt, and I glued it in place. And the pistol doesn't look anything like the one that Batman used in The Dark Knight Returns, so I just leave it in the holster. Up next is the Walmart exclusive Dark Knight Returns 30th Anniversary Edition DC Multiverse Superman action figure by Mattel. And this uses the same basic body as the Batman figure that I've been showing you. Obviously it has a new head, new cape, new briefs, and boots. Other than that, it's the same figure. I think Mattel did a pretty decent job on this figure. I think the head sculpt is pretty nice, and I like how the spit curl sticks out so far from his head, just like it did in the comic book series. They went the extra mile here and actually painted a comic book accurate S-Shield logo on Superman's chest, so I appreciate that. My only real gripes with this figure is that his belt is painted really sloppy, and I think the shade of blue that they used for his body is too dark, which is a pretty common problem with Mattel Superman figures. This Superman figure also comes with the explosive kryptonite-tipped arrow that Oliver Queen shoots at Superman to soften him up during his battle with Batman at the end of the story. Here we have the DC Multiverse Dark Knight Returns Carrie Kelly Robin figure. This came out in the New 52 Doomsday Build-A-Figure wave. I really like the head sculpt on this figure. I like this better than the DC Direct version. But the DC Direct version actually has the glasses with the green tinted clear plastic lenses so that you can see her eyes, and these are just sculpted on. But I like her hair better than the DC Direct version. Also, this figure has a more comic book accurate R logo on her chest. You can tell it's a lot more chunky than the DC Direct version. That looks more like it did in the comic books. This figure technically has more articulation than the DC Direct version, but it doesn't work particularly well. It had a lot of paint slop when I first got her, so I had to touch her up a lot myself, especially around her frames of her glasses and the buckles on her chest and her belt. This figure comes with a slingshot accessory that's sculpted fairly well. I don't like it as much as the DC Direct versions, but it can be stored in a little loop on the side of her belt there, but it's such a pain in the ass to get in and out of there that I never do it. This figure has a lot of problems, like her hands are way too big, I think. They're out of scale for the rest of her body. The cape is kind of bland, and I think it's a little too long. Like I said, the articulation doesn't work very well, but I still like this figure a lot. I think it's because I like the character so much. I love Carrie Kelly in The Dark Knight Returns, and I named my daughter after this character. Here we have the DC Multiverse Dark Knight Returns Armored Batman from the New 52 Doomsday Build-A-Figure or Collect and Connect wave. When this figure was first announced at Toy Fair or whatever, I was foaming at the mouth for this. I was super excited, and overall I'm pretty happy with him. His articulation is a little bit limited because he's such a bulky figure, but I think he looks great. The sculpted detail on him is all new. This has not been reused from another figure that Mattel has made. And I really like the spiked soles of his boots that he uses to kick Superman in the face. I just love the way this figure looks. He comes with a sonic cannon accessory. Unfortunately, it doesn't fit in his hand very well at all, so I have to use a clear plastic rubber band to secure it in there to keep it from falling out all the time in my display case. Bad things that you have to watch out for is sloppy paint on the exposed part of his face and on his belt. If you're interested in picking up this figure, you shouldn't have any trouble finding him at retail. I know he's peg warming pretty hard, at least in my area. Even though he's got limited articulation, he's got a lot of really nice sculpted detail. I think he looks really unique and badass, and I'm really happy to have added this figure to my collection. Alright, next up we have the DC Multiverse Mutant Leader figure from the New 52 Doomsday Build-A-Figure wave. I'm really happy to have this figure in my collection. You know, DC Direct, DC Collectibles never got around to making a Mutant Leader figure. The only other option for this character is the Mezco version that came in a exclusive 2-pack, I think. And I'm glad to have this figure in my collection without spending an arm and a leg for the Mezco version. What little paint work there is on this figure is done pretty well. He comes with a big-ass torch for an accessory and a crowbar. I really like the sculpted detail on this figure. I'm not 100% sure how many of these parts have been reused. I know the arms are the same as the Batman and Superman figures, except for the spikes around the wrist. But the rest of the figure, I don't know if it's been reused from a Masters of the Universe Classics figure or not, because I don't collect those. My only gripe with this figure is that I wish he'd come with an alternate head sculpt, minus the visor, with the bandage over his nose, so you could recreate the second fight with Batman in the Dark Knight Returns comic book series. But other than that, I think he's really great, especially for the price point. Alright, so next up we have the Walmart exclusive Dark Knight Returns 30th Anniversary Edition DC Multiverse Son of Batman figure. And this isn't supposed to be Batman's actual son or offspring like Damian Wayne. This is a reformed gang member. So at the beginning of the Dark Knight Returns, Batman's been retired for 10 years, and he comes out of retirement because Two-Face has resurfaced and he's causing problems, and there's also a gang terrorizing Gotham City called the Mutants. So Batman takes on the mutant gang leader, and he's been retired for 10 years, he's out of practice, he's a little out of shape. The mutant gang leader kicks Batman's ass. So Batman comes up with a better strategy. He invites all of the mutant gang members to come watch him fight the mutant gang leader the second time. And he kicks the mutant gang leader's ass, and all of the members of the mutant gang swear allegiance to Batman. And this guy in particular is like the poster child of that movement. He goes on television showing everyone his bat symbol tattoo on his face and declares that the mutants are now the sons of Batman. This is basically the DC Universe Classics Guy Gardner figure, repainted. He's got a new head sculpt, obviously, and new forearms with the scallop sculpted on there. For accessories, this figure comes with a really nice torch with orange tinted clear plastic flames. I like that one a lot more than the torch that the Mutant Leader came with. This figure also comes with a really nice double-barreled shotgun. So when I first got this figure, I thought, well, this is a pretty clever idea for a repaint, but then going back and looking at the actual artwork from the comic, the costume details don't really match up very well, and this just seems like a really lazy repaint by Mattel. Here we have the DC Comics Multiverse Dark Knight Returns Joker action figure from the King Shark Collect and Connect wave. And I think the sculpted detail in this figure is excellent. I think he looks like he just walked out of a panel from the Dark Knight Returns comic book series. He comes with a lot of really great accessories. He has a handgun, he comes with a small knife or a dagger, and he comes with 2 different head sculpts. The one that you see on the figure now is how he appears throughout the majority of the Dark Knight Returns, and it's kind of a unique Joker design. He's kind of sexually ambiguous. I like this a lot. This figure also comes with an alternate head that looks a lot more like your traditional Joker, and it looks exactly the way he did at the end of the Dark Knight Returns when Joker and Batman have their final showdown in the Tunnel of Love. Batman actually throws a batarang in the Joker's right eye. This head sculpt comes with a removable batarang that fits into the Joker's right eye, and you pretty much have to display it this way because if you remove the batarang, there's just a hole there where the eye should be. So there's very little paint work on this figure. The blue parts that you see, his shirt and his shoes, are actually cast in that blue colored plastic. The only real paint work on him is on the different heads, and these heads are both cast in this light gray colored plastic, and they both had a really sloppy white dry brush effect. And on every example that I've seen, he was missing paint under his cheekbones here, along his jaw. So what I did was I got some watered down white acrylic paint and kind of touched up his face, and it looks a little streaky, but I think it fits in with the artwork from the comic book since it was kind of watercolor. I cleaned up his hairline here too, and I repainted his hair with a couple different shades of green. I think it looks a little bit better. He's a lot easier to get a hold of now than he was when he first came out. They're actually peg warming in a couple stores in my area. Try and find one with good paint, or if you're handy with a paintbrush, you can fix it yourself like I did. Finally, we have the Walgreens exclusive DC Comics Multiverse Flash and Atom figures from The Dark Knight Strikes Again. The Dark Knight Strikes Again is a sequel to The Dark Knight Returns, and I actively dislike it. The artwork is horrendous, and the story is really silly and stupid. In fact, the only two redeeming parts of that story, in my opinion, are the Flash and the Atom. Basically, Lex Luthor has taken over the country, he's captured the Atom and holding him prisoner in a petri dish. It's been a while since I read it, but I think Lex Luthor also kidnaps Iris West and threatens to kill her unless the Flash gets into this giant turbine that looks like a hamster wheel, and it's hooked up to a generator. He's being fed intravenously so he doesn't have to stop, and he's single-handedly generating power for the entire eastern seaboard. I thought that was really cool and clever, but that's about it. The rest of the story after that I think went to shit, and I wouldn't recommend anybody read it. So I think this is another lazy repainted figure by Mattel. Basically, it's just a reused DC Universe Classics Flash figure with different feet. Those shoes are actually comic accurate to The Dark Knight Strikes Again. He actually did have those big, thick soles on his shoes, which don't make a lot of sense for a runner. The Atom figure is also reused from DC Universe Classics line. I don't have any plans on displaying this figure with my Dark Knight Returns figures. I actually don't mind the costume for this Flash figure, so I'm probably going to display him with my Flash collection eventually when I have more display space. Basically, the only reason why I bought this Flash figure, and the reason why I think most people will buy this Flash figure, is for the alternate Bruce Wayne head sculpt that he comes with. So I wasn't really planning on picking up one of the Walgreens exclusive Flash figures, but my friend Paul wanted one, so I was keeping an eye out for him while I was hunting around different Walgreens stores for the Marvel Knights and Thor Ragnarok Marvel Legends waves, and happened to run across a handful of the Flash figures. I saw this Bruce Wayne head sculpt in the package, and I was like, I have to have it. So not only that, but then I had to go find another armored Batman figure so I could display one with the regular helmeted head and one with the unmasked old man Bruce Wayne head. I think the paintwork on this is excellent. The sculpted detail on this head sculpt, I think, looks a lot like the comic book series. It's pretty well done, and I think this is the major selling point for that Walgreens exclusive Flash figure. I tried to put this head sculpt on one of the non-armored Dark Knight Returns Batman figures, and I didn't think it looked very good at all. The helmeted head on this armored Batman figure is a real pain in the ass to get off, but once you do, it's pretty easy to get the old man Bruce Wayne head on this figure. Eventually, when I have the time, I would like to Dremel out the exposed part of the face on the helmeted head sculpt there, and paint the inside black so it looks like an empty helmet, and then give that to Superman as an accessory. Because in the comic book series, he rips the helmet off Bruce Wayne's head, and I think that would look really badass and cool. So I made this backdrop to display my Dark Knight Returns collection, and it's just a black piece of foam core that I measured to make sure it would fit inside my Detolf cabinet. On the left side, I tried to paint a lightning bolt to imitate the artwork from the cover of the first chapter of The Dark Knight Returns. For the building on the right side, I used a piece of cardstock to make a stencil for this building, and I tried to imitate artwork from the comic book again. And I didn't paint the buildings along the bottom here because you'd have figures standing in the way. You wouldn't be able to see that anyway. Then I just used different shades of blue acrylic paint and kind of dabbed along the outside edge of that stencil, and I painted the whole thing blue. I got a little bit lazy with the bat symbol instead of painting one myself. This is a plastic decal that you can use on your car that came in a set that I bought a while back. I just stuck that on there, and since it was a little glossy, I hit it with some dull coat so it wouldn't reflect light. So when you display your action figures on a shelf, obviously the ones in the back get obscured by the ones in front. So what I like to do is build risers or little platforms for the figures in the back to stand on to elevate them up so you can see them better. And this base is insulation styrofoam. I did a whole video about custom action figure flight stands, and this is the same technique that I used essentially. This is just a wire hanger. I dipped it in Plastidip to protect the action figures from the sharp metal edge on the top here, and it's bent around on the bottom for a base, and I covered that up with scrap pieces of foam core board that I had to make it look like cracked, broken sidewalk or pavement. Then I mixed a little bit of craft sand in with some Elmer's school glue and acrylic paint. I brushed this on to the foam core sidewalk here, and then I dry brushed it with a couple different shades of light gray acrylic paints. This is the glow-in-the-dark streetlight accessory that came with the Carrie Kelly Robin figure, and she came with this corner piece of the sidewalk. These other two sections of sidewalk came with other DC Direct Batman figures, I think maybe from Long Halloween or Dark Victory. I can't remember for sure which ones. The paint on this one is a little bit different, but you can't really tell when you've got figures displayed on it. In the comic book, when Superman arrives at Crime Alley, Batman actually has a cord plugged in to this street light, and he's siphoning electricity from Gotham City to power his suit to help him fight Superman. So here's the Superman figure, flanked by the son of Batman and the mutant gang leader. Next we have the helmeted and unhelmeted armored Batman figures. Here's the Dark Knight Returns Joker figure, and I'm considering buying another one so I can display it with each different head sculpt. I think that would be really cool, but I don't know exactly how I would work it into this specific display. Here's my customized Walmart exclusive Batman figure with the rifle, and the other Walmart exclusive Batman figure with the shadow painted on the front of his mask. Next is the DC Comics Multiverse Carrie Kelly and the DC Direct Carrie Kelly Robin action figures. And finally, here's the Batman Unlimited Dark Knight Returns Batman figure and my custom Batman Unlimited Dark Knight Returns Batman. These are the first two that I picked up, and they're still my favorites in this collection. Years ago, DC Direct did a set of 4 figures based on Dark Knight Returns. They did Batman, Superman, Joker, and this Carrie Kelly Robin here. Those figures came out before I started collecting action figures. Even though these Mattel Dark Knight Returns figures don't have the greatest articulation, they are leaps and bounds better than the DC Direct figures as far as articulation goes. I think the Robin and the Superman DC Direct figures are comparable to these, but the Batman and the Joker figures are not. I much prefer to have the Mattel versions of those. If I had all the money in the world, I'd probably pick up all the Mezco 112 Collective Batman, the Dark Knight Returns figures, but I don't, and I'm kind of on the fence about those anyway because I'm not real crazy about cloth outfits on 6-inch figures. I do prefer cloth capes on 6-inch figures, but I don't know about the costumes. And the high price point for those figures makes it pretty easy for me to pass those up. Over the years, Mattel has produced more action figures based on the Dark Knight Returns comic book series than any other toy company. And overall, I'm very happy with the quality of these action figures. The Dark Knight Returns is my all-time favorite Batman story, and I'm really thrilled to have a collection of action figures to celebrate it. Alright, so here's my Dark Knight Returns action figure collection back in my Detolf cabinet, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed putting it together. Most of these figures are still available at regular retail price and aren't too hard to find, so if you're inspired to start your own collection of Dark Knight Returns action figures, then you shouldn't have too much trouble. If for some reason you're watching this and you haven't read The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller, Klaus Janson, and Lynn Varley, then I highly suggest you pick it up. I think it's pretty accessible for new readers. You don't necessarily have to know decades of canon to get into this story. In my opinion, it's the greatest Batman story ever told. So thanks for watching this. I appreciate it. Please leave a comment down below, like the video, share, and subscribe to my channel for more videos like this in the future. Until next time, take care. Bye.